Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our Youth Work Insight session. We'll give it another few minutes just to let everybody come through from the waiting room, and then we'll get started. We've got a really busy and full session today, and we've got a really packed waiting room. Actually, I'm still just watching everybody flowing through, which is great. Because what we always hope for these sessions is that we can reach the maximum number of youth workers, because that brings the maximum benefit to as many young people as we possibly can. As I say, I'm just going to give it another minute or two to let people in, and then we'll get started. While we're waiting, I'll just let you know a couple of things. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you after today's session, along with links to any resources or helpful bits of information that people share. So you'll have access to that post today's session. The other thing to note is that today we have some BSL interpreters with us that I'll introduce you to in a moment. So hopefully that also makes today's session more inclusive and engaging for people. Okay, I'm going to get started because we've got a lot to get through. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. My name's Abby McClatchy. I'm Director of Youth Work and Deputy Chief Exec at the National Youth Agency. What that means is that I have responsibility for everything related to practice, skills and training for people that work with young people in England. And that means that I have the absolute pleasure of facilitating and chairing our National Youth Agency Youth Work Insight sessions. Youth Work Insight sessions are an opportunity for us to bring together people with expertise in specific topics to connect to you as practitioners working with young people, so that you can learn, hopefully, some really helpful and useful things that you can take forward into your practice. It's also an opportunity to connect with some of the panelists sometimes, where you might hear something and think, oh, I really want to know more about that. I wonder how I can find out some more. And often it's through speaking to our panelists. So, as a reminder, today is part of our Learning Forum series, which is focused on equity and inclusion. Today, we're specifically looking at what it means to go beyond inclusion when we're working with disabled young people. So what we're really starting to think about is how we transform our practice. So how are we challenging ableism? How are we celebrating difference and diversity in all of its forms? And how can we reimagine what inclusive practice really looks like? So what I'm going to do is just take you through a few rules about how we're going to run the session, explain to you who's here and who's with us, and then we can begin. So firstly, as I said at the start, this session will be recorded, so you'll have access to this and any notes that go with it after the event. So don't worry about having to take any notes or record it yourself. We have lots of really amazing panelists that I'll introduce you to in a moment. But what you might find is, as we go through this session, there are things that you particularly are interested in, or that you might want to ask from the things that you hear. In order to help us do that for you, we've opened the Q&A section of this Zoom meeting. So if you look on the panel at the bottom of your screen, you should, or perhaps the side, you should see something that says Q&A. And if you're able to put into that any questions that you have, I've got two of my amazing colleagues here, Zaina, who's our head of safeguarding, and Karen, who's our National Learning and Curriculum and Development Manager, who will filter and coalesce all of those questions through, so that I can make sure that they get asked to the panel as we move through the event. So you've got an opportunity to tailor some of the things that you might hear. You'll notice that we have some extra colleagues with us today that I'm going to introduce you to before we move into the panel. We have a colleague on the call called Alex, who is providing some tech support for us. So if you have any questions about the Zoom, pop something in there for Alex. We have Karen and we have Zaina, who are here filtering questions. But we also have two colleagues who are here providing BSL interpreting services for us. So you'll see Steve. Steve, give us a wave. So that's Steve. Steve's going to be with us first, and then Steve will swap in and out with Rose. Rose, give us a wave, please. Thank you. So Rose and Steve will be providing that service for you today. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to get on and introduce the panel because nobody really wants to hear from me. Everybody's definitely here to hear from the panel. So we can get started. So let's start with introductions from each of you. I'll come to each panelist. I'll just ask you to give us your name, tell us your role, and a little bit about you and the focus of your work, so what you'll bring to us today. And I'd like to start with you, please, Michaela, if that's okay, if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, hi Abby, hi everyone. My name is Michaela and I am the Programme Manager for Youth Services within MenCap across Northern Ireland. So I'm responsible for the all over strategic development of our work, as well as making sure that we work operationally, apply for funding and things like that, so that we can keep our projects running across the whole of Northern Ireland.
Wonderful, thank you. It's great to have you with us. Our next esteemed panelist is Dr. Kirsty. Kirsty, can I ask you to unmute and introduce yourself, please?
Hi everybody, thank you for having me. My name's Dr. Kirsty Lydiard. I'm currently a Senior Research Fellow at the School of Education at the University of Sheffield. I suppose I've had a 10-year career so far of working with disabled children and young people in a research context. So I'm really interested in what co-leadership means, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful, thank you, Kirsty. Brilliant. Can I please pass on to Tony?
Hi, I'm Tony. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Huddersfield, and my research looks at how crip time theory, or the idea that time is ableist, can be applied to youth work.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got people at different portions, different places in their academic career here too, which should bring an interesting mix to the panel. So thank you. And last but most certainly not least, can I come to you, please, Giles?
Oh, hi, I'm Giles. I'm from a charity called TAG, and I'm the CEO, and I basically do a bit of everything. So I do a bit of delivery, strategy, you name it. Yeah, everything, I think, kind of a little bit of everything, really.
Wonderful, thank you. And very, very humble there as well, because Giles, I believe that your organisation may well have been shortlisted for a Children and Young People Now award this year.
It has been, yeah.
Right, well, we'll definitely be coming back and asking you to tell us a little bit more about that a bit later on, if that's okay. So let's come back to that. So as you'll see, we've got a really, really diverse panel with a range and a breadth of experience and knowledge that's going to be really helpful to us when we're thinking about how we shape properly inclusive services, from an organisational and structural level to a practice level directly with young people. So we've got an absolute breadth, and I'm really excited to hear about what we can learn from our colleagues today. The way that we usually structure these sessions is we kind of think about things through three different lenses. So we think about, what do we need to know about people? So what are the things that people, the practitioners themselves, what are the skills they might need to know, or the knowledge or the competencies, or what are the things they might need to do? We then think about place. So what do we need to think about when we're thinking about environment? And then we think about practice, and that's the way that we kind of flow the session. So as we're going through and talking to the panelists, just think about the fact that we might talk about something that you're curious to ask about as we move further on. So drop things in the chat and we'll try and weave things in as we go. So we're going to start with a bit of a focus on what young people need. We're going to start, as I said, thinking about what are the things that we as workers might need to do our best work that goes sort of beyond just inclusion. We're going to think about young people's identities, their experiences, and what we might need to shift in our thinking as workers with young people to really do impactful work. So, Michaela, I'd like to start with you, please, if that's okay. I just wonder whether you could talk a little bit about the work that your organisation and you've been doing, specifically with disabled young people, and what learning that you've had from that. So what kind of things are you hearing from young people, and what do you put into practice as a result?
I suppose from our work at MenCap, we work mainly with young people with learning disability and additional needs. And what myself and my colleagues have learned during our time there is really that the young people that we work with mainly, they just want to be included, and they want to be part of the youth service of their local community. They tell us really that they just want to have access to the same opportunities that are on offer to their peers. We have a lot of young people coming to our services that have never experienced youth work before, and their peers are maybe having the opportunity to experience youth work through after schools projects and activities like that from maybe even as young as 8, whereas some of our young people, it could be 15, 16 before they're actually getting that opportunity to engage. They really just want to do those type of projects, go on residential, go on trips, get to meet new friends outside of maybe their formal school setting or their online communities that they're part of. They really just want to be able to challenge themselves and explore their own aspirations, even for the future, through the different programs that we have to offer. A lot of the time they maybe wouldn't even have thought they had aspirations for the future until they start engaging in the different programs that we have to offer. And the main thing there is they just want to feel they belong and that they're part of something bigger, to try new things, and also to have their achievements celebrated, even just those wee small wins. When it comes to the balance between mainstreaming and specialist provision, for us, I think that the main thing we would like to see is to acknowledge that there needs to be space for both. Within the wider youth work space, it shouldn't just be a specialist organisation and a mainstream organisation. We need to find ways to work more collaboratively together, because young people want to be part of wider mixed groups. They don't always just want to go to a specialist provision. They want to go somewhere where they can connect with their peers. There will be young people that do need that more tailored support, maybe some one-to-one work and support as well, but there will be those young people that will want to go and be part of wider activities with their peers. So organizationally, we need to work more together collectively so that they have those wider opportunities really for that level of engagement. And the big thing, I think, as well, is we need to stop working in competition with each other. At the end of the day, we're all meant to be here to meet the needs of young people, and too often funding and other things has us in competition with each other, and then we're trying to work with the same young people, and rather than looking at where are those opportunities to work more in partnership and really bulk out the resources and the skills and knowledge that we have. At the end of the day, those young people want to feel safe. They want to be able to participate fully, and if we're working in competition, that's not always able. It doesn't always make them feel that they're part of your service. You're building your service around the fund and ask, and not necessarily what the young people need. We find a lot of our young people do start their youth work journey with us as well, but there will come a time where we are beyond capacity of what we're able to provide, and also with our reach. So those young people, we want to be able to signpost them on to local organisations in their community that they can go on and continue to thrive and continue their journey in whatever that may look like as well. So we need to find a way of doing that that's flexible and adaptable, for the young people, but for the organisation as well, and that's okay. That progression, that positivity around that is a really good thing. The other thing that we find from our experience is that sometimes inclusion can often be an afterthought, especially when it comes to systems and funding asks. It's not necessarily about the young people themselves, or when new policies are being put in place or new structures, it's we need to think about inclusion once 90% of it's maybe all done, which then makes it very challenging and difficult for the young people we work with to engage. I think from our experience, we feel that just real inclusion, it means more than just having people in the room to answer a question or you know, to give their opinion. They really need to have an actual say in creating what that space looks like for them, and having an opportunity just to have their voice heard, and to really have an influence on what youth work looks like, not just for them, but for the other young people that are going to be coming behind them, to be part of that service as well. You know, that they don't want youth work done to them. You know, we ask their peers as well to engage, and we talk about participation and co-production. Well, we should be doing the same and offering those same opportunities to young people with disabilities as well. Their opinion matters just as much. You know, they're part of the wider community, they're a key part of society, so they should be brought along as part of that journey from the beginning as well. And just as professionals, I suppose it's on us to ensure that youth work environments that we are providing are welcoming and meaningful, and that we as a profession and as staff and as organizations hold ourselves accountable, you know, for that as well, wherever and however we can. Yeah.
Thank you. I think there was loads of really rich and interesting things in what you said. And I think one of the key messages that I heard was when you talked about how for lots of the young people that access your service, when they come to you, that might be their first opportunity to engage in sort of community youth work, and that, you know, that's really sad, isn't it? It's like their community beyond formal education is limited by the lack of inclusivity and forethought that happens in services. I think particularly interesting as well when you talked about a need to have all young people represented in service design from the start, rather than it being an add-on or a bolt-on and then a consideration. And I think there's something that we can, there's definitely something that we all should consider in relation to that. And certainly here in England, we've got some brilliant opportunities with that at the moment with the current development of the National Youth Strategy. So, you know, that it's a good moment for us to be thinking about, well, how might we be thinking differently? What can we take from today to think about how we might need to shape some of that differently? Tony, just thinking about some of that and about sort of shape and structures and some of those really structural issues that Michaela was talking about there. I wonder if you can talk to us and explain a little bit about sort of, you talk about like the political relational approach to disability. What is it? What does it mean, and how might it change the way that youth workers might respond to, in difference to, often people are taught about the medical model or the social model, but can you just talk to us a little bit about those things?
Yeah, so the medical and social model in their own rights are needed. So the medical model is seeing disability as kind of like the problem. So the thing that is wrong with somebody is the thing that we need to fix. Whereas the social model sees that society is the issue and we should adapt the way that we are in society in order to accommodate disabled people. Both are great, they both have their place, but they're not really as inclusive as kind of a combination of the two of them. So actually there are some disabled young people and disabled people across the board that actually want to get medical help for their conditions, and that's completely fine. And depending on where people are at in their life depends on what level they'd want that. Some people, like autistic young people, might not need or want any inclusion with the medical service. That's completely fine. Whereas someone who actually needs medication to survive naturally needs the medical intervention. But you kind of find in the argument that you're either one side or you're the other, and there's no harmony between the two, because naturally they butt heads, because the way that they're seeing disability is completely different. But why should they be? Because actually life changes, your priorities change, what you want to achieve at that moment in your life alters. So actually a young person who just wants to show up to school, for them, starting medication might be the best thing for them. Whereas when you're a small child, you might not need anything, because at that moment in your life, it's not necessary or it's not your priority, and that's fine. But we aren't comfortable enough having the conversation that actually it's not that deep. We don't necessarily need to pick a lane from such an early age, and you find that both sides are really, really patriotic about their respective side. So you're either ride or die social model or you're ride or die medical model, and we don't have a place where we can have a compromise, and that's kind of what the political relational model brings. It also acknowledges that disability is very, very political. So the way that we talk about disability in itself is kind of a bit of a taboo. We aren't across the board very comfortable about talking about it. As soon as someone says something's wrong with me, we're like, oh, you're really sorry. I'm just really sorry to hear that. Well, why? What? What's the fact that I've got XYZ got to do with you? Like, it starts a new conversation which incorporates everybody's lived experience as preference to one side or the other. And you find that actually young people might not necessarily know what they want at that moment in time, because life is chaotic and disability isn't the only thing they're bringing to the table, because they're still young people. Like, they're still going to have their relationship dramas. They're still going to want to hang out with their mate until 11 o'clock at night on a Tuesday when actually they've got school the next day. They're probably going to be engaging with something that's definitely slightly more risky than they should be, because they're young people. But you find in the disability circle, their entire identity is put down to disability. And there's so much more than that. Like, they're so, like, okay, they might use a speaker or like a talking device, but the conversations you're having through that device is exactly the same as somebody who doesn't need one. So it is changing the way that we look at disability and making it more normalized.
That's a really, really great example, actually, and a really great explanation for people doing work with young people. So it's about, I think, trying to summarize what I heard you say, is the medical model has a place and is important. For example, when we're talking about needs for medical interventions, or maybe a young person that's accessing your service that might need to take medication while they're there, for example. The social model has its place and is really important, because it's like, how are we as a society being disabling as opposed to focusing on health? But the key thing that I'm hearing from you is that those things are both important, but what's more important is the holistic young person, rather than whatever label they have been given for whatever reason. And I loved your example about the conversations that you're having with that young person are probably still just the same conversations that you're having with a young person who doesn't have specific disability, because we are youth workers and they are young people, and our work should be the same principally, which I guess really, really reflects what Michaela was saying about in opportunities, the opportunity to go to residentials and take risks and, you know, have fun and just have a voice. You're just saying everything should be considered through the variety of lenses and centre the young person. So what would you say would be, like, for a youth worker, what can you think of anything that might help them to really centre that, I guess, in their practice and not get sucked into just being a bit perhaps overwhelmed by somebody's medical needs, for example?
I think it's a confidence thing.
Okay.
I think, like, if you have you just see on a piece of paper, you just see a load of diagnosis, you're naturally going to overthink it. And you're going to be like, oh my God, you're going to go away, you're going to Google it, you're going to convince yourself worst case scenario is going to happen. And 95% of the time, it's not that deep. But you just need to have a conversation with the young person about what their needs are. Because actually, what two young people might have exactly the same diagnosis on paper, but the way they want to be treated or their accommodations could be completely different. And not being scared to ask questions. Because
I think
how do you learn if you don't ask questions? Like, and not feeling like you're going to offend anyone in that process. Because as long as you aren't doing it in a malicious way, then 95% of the time, people aren't going to mind answering.
Yeah.
And you'll get more out of that conversation than you will if you're just making the assumptions for the young people. And that's how you get your better co-production, because young people feel like they're included. They feel like it's their space. When things go wrong, they're naturally going to come and talk to you, regardless of what the situation is, because they know they can trust you. So I think it's just talking to young people. And it sounds really stupid because we do it on a day-to-day basis. We're really good at talking to young people. But as soon as someone goes, oh no, I need to talk to them about the fact they come in a wheelchair, why why are we scared about having that conversation? I just
I
need to make
think
sure you can get in the building, and what games can we play? Ask them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your point about people perhaps are a bit afraid of how to approach those conversations. People put too much they surround it with fear rather than recognizing you might ask a young person whether they want a tea or coffee if you're the person that's making drinks, or right, what are we planning on our program of activities for the next 3 weeks. Those conversations people feel really comfortable and safe to have, and what you're saying is it's just the same. We should just be having open and transparent conversations, because then we can actually be properly inclusive. I like the fact that you're really connecting it to co-production, because actually it's bread and butter youth work, right? This is what we should be doing as a matter of course. It shouldn't even be something that we're needing to feel a bit additionally nervous about. And I think this is a good opportunity to bring in your work, Kirsty. Obviously your research is deeply co-produced. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? What kind of things have you learned about, well, I won't jump ahead. Can you talk to us a bit about your research, please?
Yeah, so we've learnt so much from doing co-produced research with disabled children and young people in different kinds of disability communities. So we've worked with deaf and hard of hearing people, we've worked with neurodivergent disabled children, and we've worked, the project I want to talk about in relation to this answer is a project called Living Life to the Fullest. And it was a really beautiful project, which was co-led with young people with labels of life-limiting and life-threatening impairments. So the sorts of disability experiences will bring about shorter lifespans. So it was a really powerful project on so many levels. And we started the project as academics in a very adult-centric way, thinking we're going to go and engage young people in these ways. And I was tasked at the beginning with going out to SEND schools and different disabled youth spaces to go and chat to young people about research, introduce it as a concept, and invite people into our project. For a number of reasons that didn't work. I won't go into those today. But then we met a really amazing young woman who I think many people on this call might have heard of, called Lucy Watts MBE. So Lucy Watts did incredible work around youth. So she was a youth ambassador for the NHS. She worked with Together for Short Lives. And anyway, we met Lucy randomly at a conference one day, and she said, well, why are you doing your research like that? I'm a disabled young person. My needs are X, Y, Z. And how would you design this research project if, for example, I could never leave my bed? So it's quite an extreme example of what someone's access needs might be. But meeting Lucy really made us challenge what we thought research with children and young people looked like, the kinds of ways we had to think about access and approach and engagement. And I think what Lucy taught us mainly was around meaningful co-leadership. And I think a lot of that is about, as academics and researchers, relenting responsibility. So I think if we're inviting children and young people in to be part of something, that involves giving up a little bit of our power as well. And that can feel uncomfortable, but you need that to have a really authentic relationship, particularly in a research context. So basically, Lucy encouraged us to adapt our process so much where we ended up with an amazing community researcher group of young people that joined the project, worked with us day to day as researchers. And another thing we learned was not just including young people where it's convenient. So we need to, for co-production, we need to include disabled children and young people from the very beginning of the process. So in a research project, that's when you're generating research questions, you're thinking about design, what we're going to ask in this project, what's it going to do, to the very end where we're out talking to policymakers, practitioners, writing books and publishing journal articles. So inclusion from the very beginning to the very end, I think, was so important. One of the things that we learn. And again, I think research is so much about relationships, that when we do work with disabled children, young people, that again, we're really reminded of that means sharing, that means welcoming in access. I know we're going to talk about spaces a bit later. Making space for lived experience as an equal form of knowledge to academic knowledge and training and practitioner knowledge. So I think we've learned a huge amount of the work we've done so far.
Thanks, Kirsty. There was loads of really, really like golden nuggets in what you said, actually, that I think people can take to their practice. At its core, when you were talking about stepping out of power and power sharing with young people, you know, and remembering that that should be our sort of centre to our practice is really valuable. But I also thought, I really heard you talk about from the start and really thinking about how we frame any sort of project with young people, whether it's research, whether it's an environment, where, you know, whether it's one session or whether it's a series of sessions, about thinking about that universally from the start as something really, really central. I heard somebody say once, but most young people had a great opportunity. It was only a few that didn't. And actually, if you flip that on its head and thought, well, how can we plan so that the few people that have access needs, for example, are included from the start, everybody will have an inclusive experience. It's reframing, it's not an add-on, it's a built-in from the beginning, isn't it? And I really heard that. When you talked about sort of like the respectful relationships, are there any really like useful or powerful moments or learnings that you had that you think are helpful to share?
Yeah, so again, I think, you know, when we talk about respect, that means sharing things equally. It means sharing power, which I think we'll come back to. It's really important. I think what we found in that research project I just mentioned, that things like intimacy, closeness, friendship were really important to sustain the work. And I often think we think of those as kind of extraneous things, but they're also really important, and they're really important to disabled children, young people, or all young people. So we found that connecting young people together, creating communities in different research projects was really important towards having respectful working relationships with disabled children and young people. And I think when we welcome young people in, we need to expect and anticipate change. So again, we had very set ideas of how something was going to work, and young people come in and have their own ideas, their own questions. And it really we found anyway, really beneficially transform what research is and what research does and its relevance to disabled children and young people and their families. So relationships were at the core of that project and subsequent projects that we went on to do.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. And I think that echoes what Tony said, but particularly what Michaela was saying about the need for connection and the need for community. And that's both with workers and with practitioners, but also with communities of interest, perhaps geographical communities of just other young people, and really thinking about how we can maximise the opportunities for those moments of connection and compassion, because they're important to all of us, aren't they? We're humans, you know, humans innately, you know, that's how we're designed, isn't it? To kind of need a sense of community. I think how we do that is really critical. Giles, I think that you probably got quite a lot to contribute here. One of the things that I've got on my notes is about how you really focus on sort of making things like adventurous activities possible for everybody, you know, and that really sort of holistic approach to anything's possible, I guess, to bring about those connections and those sort of togetherness in experience. Can you talk to us a bit about your work? Because we all want to know, well, you've been nominated for an award. It must be pretty brilliant.
Yeah, I think TAG's always been about youth clubs. So for the first 16, 17 years, TAG just did youth clubs, or just one youth club, in fact. And then with COVID coming in and stuff, we had to rethink of how we do things, listen to young people, what could we do within the rules and what we couldn't do within the rules. And what came about was a lot of young people was starting to come, and it was starting to, a puzzle was coming together that I've written it down actually, so what they were basically saying was, we want to do the same things as our other peers who don't have a disability are doing. And there was lots and lots of really fabulous activities going on locally, but not that many SEND young people were going. There may be some SEN So it was more maybe kind of Asperger's, ADHD, young people attending these activities, but those with a little bit more needing some more support were kind of, they weren't being told no, but they weren't being encouraged. So we kind of went, well, what do we need to do? So we kind of had a look at it, and the first activity we came up with was actually skiing. So so I was on a skiing holiday. So my son has cerebral palsy, and we were on a ski holiday, and there was a young boy who was trying to escape through a window on the mountain. But when he was skiing, he was as calm as anything and really focused. And it was like, it just kind of went, oh, why aren't more people with disabilities not doing skiing? It just doesn't feel, it just feels a bit strange. So we kind of sent out to our membership kind of, you know, what do people think about skiing? And suddenly we're getting lots of people coming to us saying, we've tried it, it didn't work. And, you know, we use different organizations. So so we partnered up with Disability Snow Sports UK and started delivering snow sports, which was really good. We managed one session, and then we went into a second lockdown, and that was we kind of stopped for that for another few months. But we've had, there's kind of absolutely no barriers. So something like skiing, there's been absolutely no barriers. We've got sit skis. So TAG actually owns 5 sit skis in 3 different locations. There's like tethering, so there's always different equipment. So we've had parents saying our child can't stand, they can't do this, they can't do that. And we've said, look, there's different equipment. You know, it's not just straight away go into a sit ski. Let's see what we can do. You know, we've got one young person, it took about 9 months to get them onto one of those pommel lifts. So I don't know if anyone knows pommel lifts, but it kind of drags you up the slope. 9 months, and it took 3 people all around cushioning and just explaining, demonstrating, supporting, people being either side and behind while going up. So yes, our kind of aim is to just allow people to do anything they want to do. So that's kind of how it started. So it started with skiing. Then parents said they wanted football. I said no. I said there's lots of people who do football. Let's think out the box. Let's think of the other things which our young people don't normally, or what we don't see our young people normally doing. So we spoke to parents, spoke to young people, and we started building up our sports to the point we've now got about 20 different sporting activities. So we do parkour, climbing, fencing, rifle shooting. Lots of people look at me when I say rifle shooting, but it's actually really good. So we look at all these kind of different activities we can do. Like we did actually give up on the end with the football. So the football, we kept being asked, you know, why not run a football session? So we actually now do a session called Kickabout. And basically what was happening was there's lots of people doing, other organizations doing football, but not doing football. You know, it's a lot that was football clubs. So the football clubs obviously want people to be going into competitions and things. So there's that expectation. So we decided actually we wouldn't do that. We would have something called a Kickabout session, which just basically means kick about a football. And we have some young people who think they are Gary Lineker, and you know, and other young people, you know, one parent had his head in his hands because his son, every time the ball came near him, he just picked up and he was holding it, and his dad's going, just kick it, just throw it, do something with it. And to him, it was just like, it's come to me, I'm just going to hold it. So we've tried to do it in a way that actually everyone could be included. So those who do like, you know, yeah, I think they're the best goalie, you know, they can do their goaling, they can practice on that. And then those who just need to kind of learn those little skills of, you know, actually how to kick the ball, you know, how to just running up to that ball. So it's that kind of thing of some things, you know, I get frustrated sometimes. I'm sometimes thinking, why is the thing taking so long? You know, we've been doing this for weeks and the progress, but actually what we see as being something very small for that child or for that parent, it's massive and huge. You know, going back to skiing, we've had somebody, you know, a year and a half now skiing, and they're probably still only 5-6 meters up the slope. But mums keep saying every week it's just like half a foot more. It's just like kind of, she's getting there, she's getting there. So I think that's just the kind of thing. I think it's just like thinking out the box. I think that's a big kind of thing of, you know, it's easy to say no, but you know, it's planning. So we have we do karate classes. So we started with 1 karate class, and now we do 5 a week. And the karate classes, you know, we have somebody with cerebral palsy who's level 5, which basically means it affects all limbs. So he goes for gradings, and when he goes for gradings, I'm often there, and the feedback afterwards is, you know, it's not lip service. You know, if people aren't trying, they're not going to get their belt. So, you know, but the examiner is very good. He's very much, I'm not interested in what people can't do. I'm interested in what they can do. And then when I'm grading, I'm looking at what they can do. And then he actually does give back individual feedback. So like this, so our young person, the cerebral palsy, actually has a molded wheelchair, which basically means they shouldn't be able to move much in that chair. It should be molded to their body. He moves. So he gets his leg moving, he gets his arms out to the movements needed in those things. And yeah, so it's been really good to see. So that young person is currently a blue belt and is going for their purple and white in November. So it's quite exciting seeing that, you know, somebody who, you know, the mum was like, yeah, he's never going to be able to do that. To the point now it's like going, yes, he can, and we will find a way. So often we're filling out applications and asking people for money of just things, how we can adapt things. And, you know, some things we've had specially built. So, you know, like archery, so we do archery. And we went to a company and said, look, this is an idea we have, this kind of stand, and they built it. So yeah, anything's possible. And it's just kind of, yeah, I think going back to the first question about the, you know, what do people need? You know, I'm a firm believer young people need to be listened to. Young people should need to make their own decisions, but, and this is not always, everyone always agrees with me, but they need guidance. You know, a lot of young people, they, you know, there is peer pressure, you know, also your parents' pressure. So parents do like to control our young people. So, but it's about, you know, building those relationships, guiding them. So sometimes, you know, we may have young people who are saying, well, I'm going to go home. And it's like, well, actually, you can't go home because you're under our care at the moment. And we have to kind of explain that actually, you know, just because college has said you are an adult and you can make your own decisions and you can do what you want. Yes, but in certain situations, that's not always possible. So, so I just want to get that in because I kind of made a note earlier on.
I think, yeah, I think it's really powerful because actually all I heard woven through everything you said then is, yes, I can. Yes, we can make it happen. It's a real no barriers approach to it being, and I think the key message is that I hear in what you're saying is it's the responsibility of the adults, so the workers, the practitioners, it's the responsibility of the adults to be working out how to make sure that everything can be inclusive. It's not the responsibility of the young person. And because I thought what you said at the start was particularly interesting about like there being activities, but often I think the language you used was they're not SEN, special educational needs young people were often having opportunities, but people with additional needs through disability were excluded. And that I think you said, well, they're not being told no, but they're definitely not being encouraged. And I think that's really powerful because often it's what's unspoken that can send the strongest message, right, about what's our, I think Kirsty talks about like environments and what do environments feel like, as well as the relationships, and it can be just as damaging what we don't say, but how we present as to what we do. And so well, there are no barriers. Well, we want to do archery, right? Well, it's not, you know, we haven't got the stuff today, but we're going to make it happen. Sends a really, really, really strong and powerful message, a really powerful message. So, yeah. Michaela, just on that, because I think Giles gave us some really good examples of like, I guess, adventurous spaces and opportunities for young people. But how can we think about like spaces, sort of youth centres or places where youth work might happen in communities? And we have had quite a lot of questions about this, so you might answer them and then I'll come back to it. But thinking about what are the things that organisations might need to think about, and I had originally framed it as when they're setting up spaces for disabled young people, but I'm going to reframe that and I'm going to say when they are setting up spaces that are inclusive for young people, what are the things that might need to be considered?
Yeah, I suppose reflecting that there's probably several things that do need to be considered when you're planning, or you really, there is a passion and a want for your space to become inclusive, that you need to think about. And I suppose one of the first things really is to prioritize that idea of safety, and not just that physical safety, but the emotional safety of the young people that you're going to be working with. Because the young people that we work with, the main thing for them is they want to feel secure and safe, that they're going to be respected, that they're understood, and comfortable, that they're not going into an organization or a building or somewhere where they're going to face judgment, or there's any possibility of them being excluded from an activity or from something maybe that's on in the club, that night or whatever. So we need to find a way to make sure that the spaces are accessible, that there's clear routines, that staff are confident in their inclusive practices, that we're using all of those tools around having schedules up and things like that, where young people will know and be able to see quite visibly those who need it. This is the structure of the session tonight, having pictures up of all the staff who are going to be in, so that young people can identify and parents know who's going to be on shift or working in the club that night, things like that. Communication, and your communication being accessible, when you're working with young people with disabilities, particularly learning disabilities, there's no one means of communication that works with everybody or for everybody. So you need to learn different methods of communication and adapt it to meet the needs of individual young people. Because you could have 2 or 3 young people in your group with autism or Asperger's, and they each communicate in a different way, and you could have some young people in your group who are non-verbal. You need to find a way to be able to include them and communicate as well. So it's having those different tools in your toolbox ready to go, but that takes time and confidence, and getting to know the young person, and getting to know their family. So the relational side, organizations really need to, and workers, we need to get back to remembering that youth work is as much about the relational side of everything that we do, and we need to build that trust, not just with the young people, but with their parents and carers as well, because they're the ones at home encouraging the young person to be brave and to go out the door and to try something new, and to give it a go when that young person's maybe had a very draining day, or maybe something difficult has happened to them that day in school, or they're just tired. It's the parent at home who's encouraging them and supporting them to get up and out the door again, to go back, because they know then once they're in your space, they'll have fun, they'll enjoy it, and things like that. So that relationship with the parents is so important, and getting to know the young person's needs before they come to your space. That's something that we do as part of our practices, try to get to know as much about the young person and their disability as we can, not to be exclusionary, but to find out what do we need to put in place to make sure the young person feels safe and included in everything that we're doing. We do find sometimes that parents are a wee bit reluctant to give that information because they're too used to it being used as a reason to exclude them from taking part in things. So it can take a wee bit of building that trust up as well, with them. And parents love to hear about the wee small wins, that a young person achieved that night, maybe in the group or in the club, and giving them that feedback at the end of the evening or the afternoon is really, really good. And going back to something that Tony had said earlier around that need for staff to feel confident and asking questions, and constantly learning, there is a real need for organizations to look at training and upskilling their staff, around different types of disabilities, how young people present with their disability, how they respond in different situations. You're not always going to get it right, you know, as I know a few people have said as well. And we're constantly learning, because it comes across, it manifests itself in different ways, and each young person is unique, and you will see that, you know, whenever they come through the door. But it's just having that confidence that you have a bit of knowledge around it, you've a bit of experience with it, and if you get it wrong, or things haven't worked out, that's okay. You have that conversation maybe with the parent at the end of the session to say, this is what happened this evening, and you know, this is how the reaction worked, this is how we dealt with it, you know, were we right, is there something you would have done differently, and sharing that learning then with everybody else, and taking that time to debrief at the end of your delivery. And I suppose the other important thing is we need to give our staff time. You know, when you're working or you want to do inclusive practice, you just can't go and lift, you know, a game, or go and lift a resource and just think off the top of your hat, right, this is what we're going to do. When you're trying to make inclusive resources, there's a lot of adaptation needed. There's a lot of maybe things that need to be created and designed, taken in different signs and symbols and letters and sizes and all of that. It just can't be done, you know, quickly. Staff need time to create that and put that together, and they need the space to do that properly. And too often we're rushing to get delivery done and delivery planned. That it's okay to try things and pilot activities out and learn from, if it didn't work, this is why. The young person will tell you that didn't work for us, that just their lack of engagement, they'll switch off, you know, and you just go, right, this isn't working, we need to change it. And there needs to just be that wee bit of flexibility again, because I know a few people said it earlier, you could have a whole session planned and young people will come in, and again, depending on their mood, their experience that day, might just have to rip it up and go, that's definitely not going to work tonight, we're going to have to completely try something different, you know. So there's a mixture of things to consider, but those would probably be the main ones. Yeah, you know, training of staff, that flexibility, that relational side of everything, but prioritizing the safety, the physical and emotional safety of the young people when they're in that space with you.
Michaela, I think the reason I probably really smiled when you said about sometimes you think you've got a brilliant session planned and then you just have to tear it up and put it in the bin, is because, like, if that's not Youth Work 101, I don't know what is. You know, every time you go in and you think that you've got the best night planned and then something's happened, there's been a problem, you know, whatever, for whatever reason, it's like, right, well, that's out and now we're doing this thing. And so it is about holding on to that. I think as well, though, you talked about, like, needing to make time and space to really engage with people. What works for you? What do I need to do differently? And recognizing that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but again that it's on us. Both you and Giles talked about the need to connect into people that know young people well. So hearing from young people themselves, but also hearing from other trusted adults that are safe and appropriate to help you to make sure that you're doing your best work alongside those young people. Yeah, I think you started to talk as well about physical spaces, so psychological and physical safety. And I think there's obviously something around physical environments, and we have got some questions about those to come back to you later. Like, a lot of people are really concerned about how they might need to manage physical spaces. But I think there's also something about, like you say, the psychological safety. And I think I'd quite like to kind of hear a little bit from you on this, Kirsty, because I know in your work you highlight access is not just about ramps and toilets, right? You talk about culture and you talk about intimacy, and, you know, back to this point, that central point of belonging, which is absolutely my drumbeat for everything. So how do you see then the potential for youth workspaces to kind of move beyond this idea about access? Oh, well, it's definitely inclusive because we've got a ramp now, or and being much more about genuine inclusivity and, like, affirming of people. So I guess I'm saying, you know, how do we make sure that youth work spaces are sending the right message, the yes you can and this is a place for you, to young people?
Yeah, it's such a good question and such an important area. And I think, again, you know, we've learned so much about access, and one of the things that's really key, I think, that we often omit, because I think we reduce access to particular functional things that we need, like accessible toilets and like parking and so on. And those things are deeply important. If you can't get through the door, you can't participate. I'm not trivialising that. But I think in my work particularly, there's something really important about access is deeply emotional as well. So how we experience, so I'm a disabled person too, and how we experience access or lack of access is on quite a deep emotional register as well, and that is linked to belonging. Am I welcomed in a space? And I think disabled children and young people know pretty quickly if a space is there for them and welcomes them, and if it's not. And again, to go back to what you said a minute ago, actually about it being the responsibility of the adults, I think that's so important, because I think we often reduce access again to someone who provides it and someone who consumes it. So it's a really binary way of thinking about access. And actually, access should be a concern for all of us. We all benefit from good access, disabled or not. So it needs to be a shared culture around access. And to go back to the emotionality of it, there's a North American scholar activist called Mia Mingus, whose work I love, and she talks about access intimacy, and she describes it as that kind of elusive feeling that someone just gets your access needs. So again, that's on the responsibilities on the space, the environment, the people in it, to create the kinds of conditions where disabled people not only just survive a space and environment, but thrive in it. And in our work, we talk a lot about anti-ableist context. So again, that's taking it further from thinking about inclusive spaces and accessible spaces to, again, what kinds of environments do we need to create that meaningfully enable disabled people to flourish? And I think, again, that's something quite different. Yeah, access is so emotional. Like, we've worked with young people where if access isn't there, you feel othered, you feel rejected, you feel actively excluded, and those things stay with you. They don't easily go away. And I think, you know, disabled children and young people are so used to traversing different spaces that are often inaccessible. When you hit a point that is accessible and works for you, it's so powerful. There's such an emotional sense of belonging that you fit. And again, I think there's something to go back to the labour aspect. Being a disabled person in an inaccessible world takes work. It's a lot of labour to make sure that spaces, systems, structures work for you. So again, if we as practitioners or youth workers or researchers can alleviate that labour, share that labour with disabled people, that you're not advocating for everything you need every time you go anywhere. That, like, it's something that's free to do, that all of us could engage with in our practice.
It's so powerful. When you said that, every single person on here just started nodding, really nodding, about, you know, how hard work it is when the burden's on you to have to think about something that should be a given for you anyway, that shouldn't be something that you're having to think about before a choice as a young person. You know, youth workers are right for young people. It shouldn't be a burden of a young person to have to think about, oh, I need to make sure that all these things are in place before I can even consider whether I'm going to be okay in that space or not, psychologically or physically. Yeah, I think that the phrase that you use, I immediately wrote it down, was it shouldn't be about just surviving a space, it should be about thriving. And you also use the word flourishing, and I just think that's, and I can visualize so many situations where it's been like, oh, that must have felt really uncomfortable, because something that's seemingly so innocuous and so small, but actually when it's a constant barrier for somebody in their life, just is so exclusionary, right? So exclusionary. And so how we think about all of our work in that lens. And I think, Michaela, you said we can't possibly know every single communication style, because actually people are humans, and humans are all intrinsically different, regardless of whether we've got red hair, brown, you know, whatever our diversity is, we're all different. But there is a point there is a starting point that we can come from that just makes things much, much, much more inclusive. Okay, I'm going to move us on, primarily because I don't think I've ever seen this many questions coming through, and we've still got another part to get through. which I think is quite telling in and of itself, isn't it? That people are really hungry to want to be inclusive from a starting point of their practice. So that's good. But it just means that we might need to perhaps think about how we can do more of this work, really, but to help support youth workers. Okay, so we're going to start thinking about practice now, because we clearly moved into it there, didn't we? Like, it's on you as the worker to make sure that your practice is rooted in absolutely equality and equity for all of the young people that you're here to serve, right? So I'm going to ask us to start thinking about youth workers and organisations and what we might need to do in our practice and think about to move on. So we're rooting what we've been talking about absolutely in concrete actions. What's the things we're wanting people to take home and do, right? Thinking about culture, perhaps training, service design, delivery, like golden rule stuff. So Tony, I want to come to you first, because some of your work is really, really interesting, and I don't think are things that people necessarily would have thought about, which is around crip time. And so it'd be really helpful if you could kind of explain a little bit about what that is and what challenge it brings to us as workers, and how it might be useful to us as workers when we're thinking about flexibility, rest, and how we can make a better experience for young people.
Yeah, so crip time is the theory of time being ableist, which I'm very aware sounds absolutely mental, or a little bit far-fetched. But it kind of, when it's broken down, there's kind of three main ways. There are other people kind of say that it goes down to like 20 different ways, but very simply, they all kind of fall within three categories. So first one, how long do things take? For certain young people, certain tasks will take a lot longer, whereas other young people, they could just do it a heck of a lot quicker. I always love the example of Lego. So if you have a young person, usually the example from one of my participants was one of their young people is really into Lego. So you give them a Lego set and they're doing it in 5 minutes. Doesn't matter, like that's their thing, they're really good at it. Whereas you give it another young person who absolutely hates Lego, it's going to take them 24 hours to do, and even then they'll procrastinate it. So how long do things take? Whether that's quicker, slower, it works both ways. The second way to look at it is, what does the day look like? So actually, if you've got a young person who's up at 3 a.m. taking medication, why do we expect them to be functioning at 8 a.m.? Why are youth clubs always after school when they've just done 8 hours? Is actually the best time to do an inclusive session going to be at 5 p.m. when they've just done 8 hours? Why can't we do it at the weekend? Actually, why can't we have a nap at 10 a.m. or like do some of the day, have a nap, come back in the afternoon? So what does that look like for that young person? And the third way is, what other order are like our life events? So we all expect that young people will be in education till they're 18, and then they'll go on to further education or they'll get a job. Well, actually, for disabled young people, that might not be feasible for so many reasons. When will they move out? Well, what does moving out actually mean? Will they always stay in the family home? Will they move into residential care? Or will they live independently? And how are we approaching that conversation? Because you might have 3 different young people having 3 different move-ons, and how are we navigating that conversation in a way that's actually quite empathetic to that young person's needs? Because they might never have thought about moving out, because for them that's just not where they're at. But also relationships within that. So when do they get a girlfriend, boyfriend? When are they going to move out and start their own family? Are they able to have their own family? But what does family actually look like? And it's looking at those elements in a way that's actually more inclusive, because youth workers do a lot of work around transitions. Yes. That is the majority of what we do. And how we navigate that is usually it's quite binary. It's very linear. We expect young people when they get to 18 to go to university, get a job. And we spend a lot of time having those conversations. We also spend a lot of time having relationship dramas and being like, I think you're being a bit dramatic there. Let's unpick this slightly. What does a healthy relationship look like, and what doesn't it look like? And what do power dynamics look within that? But we don't actually think about, for disabled young people, that looks completely different for a variety of reasons. So it's taking a step back and rethinking what we already know, because I spoke to 8 participants from across the country, and at least 5 of them was like, well, actually, when I read about it and I delivered the session, most of it was common sense, because we're already doing it. Because we know our young people. We know what they're like. Like, we understand that actually this young person really doesn't get emotion. So when we're talking about emotional stuff, we have to take a second and we talk to them in a way that they understand. It's also like, if you know your young people, most of it does link in really nicely. And even though when I always start explaining the concept, everyone looks at me like, okay, that's a bit far-fetched. How do you expect me to include this? Youth workers are already doing it.
Yeah.
By default, we are really flexible. We adapt our practice because we want young people to show up. That is what we do. Anti-oppressive practice is rooted in every single decision we make. And if it's not, you're not doing your job right. But it's just taking it one step further and being like, actually, I know I've got to have this conversation with this group of young men. I worked with an organisation who he worked with young men. And from that conversation, they did the River of Life activity, which is they map out what had happened in their life and what do they want to achieve. And from that conversation, it was no one's having conversations with these disabled young men about what they want to achieve in their life. What do they want to get out of it? How are we going to help them get there? Because most of the time they've been kicked out because it's behavioural issues. Because no one's sat down and been like, okay, so why are you getting frustrated? What's the issue? No one's looked at the barriers for engagement and helped that young person navigate their emotions. So it's just taking that little extra time to think about your young people and being like, actually, can I just move forward? Or is there something so normalized as time can be applied to? So yeah.
Oh, there are so many really interesting things in what you said there, actually. Like the really simple thing of like very few youth provisions running at the weekend, holistically speaking, is an absolute clanger, isn't it? You know, just yeah. And actually would be really, you know, really interesting from a census perspective, youth work census perspective, to think, oh, I wonder how many sessions that are inclusive are running at those times that are actually times that work for more young people. But also I think your point about transitions is really critical. You know, we're at a time where we know there's rising numbers of young people that are not in education, employment or training. Therefore there will be more of a focus on trying to do that work with young people. But what are the questions that we're asking, and how are we framing that work? And are we really asking the right questions? Coupled with the opposite, which was what you were saying about those particular young people, which is, and what about the young people for whom people just don't have any expectations, so they're not included in those discussions in the first place? So how are we adapting our practice to think about those? So much to think about. Also, thanks for such a simple explanation of such a complex theory, because like I walked away from that going, yeah, I get that. So brilliant, thank you. Giles, building on from that, and building on from, I think, particularly the last point that Tony made about, hey, nobody's had that conversation with those young people, perhaps because nobody felt able to. You talk about disabled young people should not be wrapped in cotton wool, which is very evident from that vast array of sort of adventurous activities that make me nervous as a human, even thinking about like being at the top of a ski slope. But can you share really sort of what's been how your learning by doing, just having a go at stuff, has helped you change your mindset, maybe your colleagues' mindsets, and maybe wider people? How have you helped people get to this idea that anything's possible? We just need to think differently.
I think for us, one of the ways we do things, and we're quite lucky because being a charity, we can make decisions quickly. So some feedback I got back, I was talking to somebody about the local youth services, and it was the voluntary sector lead for children and youth, and her reply back was, you're in a lucky position because you can make decisions like that and just do it, whereas the council, it's not. It's a long process to get things done. So I think for us, I think when an idea comes, rather than spending ages thinking about it, we just go and do it. So something like, say, the karate classes. So that was actually the voluntary sector organisation contacted us saying, you know, we've got somebody who would like to do some karate classes. He's not a charity. I thought maybe it might work. You two might work together quite well. So I had a conversation with that chap on the Friday night, on the Monday night at 5 o'clock. By 9 o'clock the following morning, we'd had a venue. We'd sorted out the advertising for it, and we just ran with it and thought, let's just see how this goes. Here we are 18 months later, we're now running 5 classes over 3 locations. So I think sometimes it's thinking about things, you overthink it, and then you then start thinking, why can't we do it? Whereas I think if you kind of just run straight into it, as long as you've got the safety aspects cleared, everything else comes about later. I think one of the things I get asked a lot from youth workers who don't tend to do SEND work is the attitude is kind of, well, they need specialist. It needs to be specialist. They need to go there, that specialist. And funny enough, I was in a meeting with a director the other day for the Disabled Children's Services, and I said it's really interesting because my understanding is if somebody has an assessed need, so they have a social worker, someone's just walked past my front door. They receive support from the team Disabled Children. If they have an additional need but they're not assessed, then that is down the responsibility of Universal Services. But Universal Services, how can I put it in a diplomatic way? It's a bit like a lot of organisations. People don't like change, and it takes a lot of time to go and get that mindset moved and changed. I think actually it wasn't that bad. It was actually quite fun. I actually enjoyed that. People with SEND are exactly the same as young people without SEND. Every child, as you said earlier, everybody's different. We've actually had some times we've had youth workers come just to try out, get some experience working with people with disabilities, and they've actually kind of said, oh, that's actually easier. I actually quite enjoyed that. It was like, I wasn't expecting that. So I think it's just comfort zones. So I think it's just we do offer out to people to come. The big things always talked about is training. I'm not trained to do that. And our attitude has always been, well, you can't get trained. There's courses, so you can learn Makaton, you can there's different kind of courses you can do, but you can't learn on a course how to work with somebody with additional need. It's experience, and it's just doing. I have a sister with disabilities, so I've got over 40 years experience, 30 years actually in clubs and things for young people with disabilities, and I still get things wrong, and it's just learning. And it's like, our young people take everything literally, so sometimes you may say something and they take it a different way, and then World War III started, happens monthly, and it's just about building those relationships, and then hopefully they're understanding where maybe my little bits and how I say things or do things, and theirs, and it's just building a relationship like you would with any other young person.
Nice. Thanks, Giles. I think you talked a lot about people being a bit fearful, scared of getting it wrong, scared of the risk, scared of change, scared of this, and actually that's kind of echoed through lots of what other people have said too. Fundamentally what you're saying is just do good youth work with young people, try it out, give it a go. We all make mistakes. It's okay to get things wrong within the parameters of obviously reasonable safety, just like all good youth work. And interesting. I quite liked what you were talking about sort of trying to bridge the gap between statutory and voluntary services, because I think we all need to be doing a lot more of that now, because of the economic situation we find ourselves in, because of the localism agenda. There's going to be much more of that. So I'm really excited to potentially see what organisations like yourselves are doing really brilliant work in communities, how that can kind of become a bit of a pebble in a pond ripple effect and start changing hearts and minds. I think it's got some real potential. On that, and thinking about the sort of hearts and minds piece of it, Michaela, we have talked a little bit about specialist skills and whether we need them specifically or not, but also that it's not just about that, and that actually our work and your work is particularly joyful. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, and perhaps like share with us, you know, if there's one thing that you wish, you know, every youth worker knew or could practice better in this space?
Yeah, it is really joyful. Sometimes, you know, I get the opportunity to go along to sessions or events or things that our young people are involved in, and it just puts a smile on your face to see their confidence and their passion about what they're doing, and it really just reminds you of why we do this, why we put up with the stress of the funding applications and all of that, to really give them these opportunities. And if you could bottle their confidence sometimes, you'd definitely be a millionaire from it. But I think from a practice point of view, from a youth work point of view, it's to find that joy, to know that and recognize the small wins. You know, too often we're too considered about this big journey that young people go on, but for a lot of young people that we work with, those small wee individual wins are so big for them and so important to have acknowledged. You know, if you have a young person who typically sits in your group and doesn't speak out, but all of a sudden after maybe a month or two starts to engage in conversation that's happening, takes themselves away from that self-isolation and starts to try and join in, and maybe some of the social time that's going on, and starting to try and build a new friendship or relationship, that is such a big win for them, you know, and for you, and for what it is that's being offered, you know. And we don't take time to reflect on that enough, you know, and acknowledge those wee small wins, because a lot of the time we're having to think ahead of that bigger journey of what we're trying to achieve, the targets, you know, and all of that. And it's those wee small wins that just remind you how powerful youth work for young people with disabilities is, for young people in general as well. You know, it is a really, really powerful tool. And as youth workers, we need to be confident in our ability and our approach. You know, it's okay, as Giles said, to get things wrong and to learn from that. You know, we need to provide, going back to that idea of time, we don't take a lot of time ourselves to reflect back on those small wins for young people, but also those small wins for ourselves, because we have had a hand in that, you know, through the support and space that we have provided. We have had a hand in that as well, and just to reflect on our practice, and you know, how we're feeling about work, and how we're feeling about the opportunities that are being offered, and our values and things around that. We don't do that enough, and that's how you learn as well. You learn from other colleagues, you learn from sharing those experiences, and there's not really enough spaces there to do that collectively as workers and professionals. And don't be afraid to challenge yourself. We ask young people to challenge themselves all the time, and then we forget, you know, we feel uncomfortable when we go to things where we're asked to do an icebreaker, or we're asked to do something, forgetting we ask young people to do this all the time. So you know, don't be afraid to challenge yourself and ask those questions of yourself as well, you know, and of your colleagues too. And just remember, it's youth works for all. You know, they really, young people with disabilities really do deserve to have the same opportunities as everyone else in society, as those other young people without a disability. And we have a responsibility to make sure that when they're in our space, that you know, they really have a good fun experience, and youth work's fun. There is that fun element to it that sometimes we get tied up in as well. So just remember.
Oh, I think Michaela froze just on that line. But actually, what a lovely line to freeze on. Youth work is fun. Remember, youth work is fun, and we should be creating environments where all young people are having fun with us. That's what it's about. Okay, Kirsty. Michaela started to talk a little bit about learning from our colleagues, learning from each other, taking time to reflect and to learn. And I just wanted to come to you really to ask you your thoughts on kind of representation matters. I know you sort of talked about sort of or have reflected on lived experience, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why disabled youth workers are so important. And how co-leadership could really change our culture.
Yeah, again, a really important area, I think. I think there's something really important for disabled children and young people that if you can see it, then there's a likelihood you can be it. And again, in some ways, that sounds really simple. And it's, we've talked a lot today about some things just aren't possible, or what do we need to do to make things possible. But I think giving disabled children, young people space to imagine different kinds of futures, whether that's in relation to, as Tony said, who you're going to live with, who you're going to be with, where you're going to live, what you're going to work as, and so on, is really, really important. And again, I think, how can we think about disabled youth work as a sector where we need more disabled people in that sector as workers, and what would that mean to, again, the disabled communities that we want to work with. The other thing I was going to say around ableist culture is I think we're at a really scary time for disabled people at the moment. So we've seen, conversations about welfare reform, which has invited, age-old scrounger rhetorics of disabled people only claim benefits. What are the costs of disabled children and young people? So we've seen crisis in SEND education, and we're seeing, the end of life bill go through Parliament. So I think there are messages in our culture that are really important, where those really positive examples of disabled people as workers, disabled people as actors or artists, and so on, become really much more important in times of crisis. And I also think there's something around disclosure as youth workers as well. So a lot of employment cultures are ableist, but what would it mean? How can we think about youth work as a space where existing youth workers can disclose around disability, impairment, and neurodivergence? Again, to change who's doing the work, how we're relating to each other, and how we're being more vulnerable in terms of talking about disability and relating to disabled young people.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting and important point, actually, that point around like what we share and feeling comfortable to know that we're professionals. We fully appreciate the boundaries of our role, but equally it's okay to be human, and there are bits of us that it's really important for us to share. For our colleagues and for the young people that we seek to serve, I think, and particularly, as you said, at times of crisis and at times where culturally we're almost moving to a culture more of exclusion than inclusion, and how can we be the change and co-create the change with young people for a better society moving forward. I think that's hugely powerful, and something for us all to consider. How do we create those environments in our interactions with young people, but also in our broader interactions and in our organisations and within our infrastructure? We can really be the change that we want to see. I mean, we have got so many questions. There is no way that we would get through it all, I think, even if we were here till tea time. But I'm going to, Zaina and Karen magically in the background have been trying to group them together so that we can get through some. So I'm just going to open those up and I'll have a quick look and see which ones we might want to focus on. So there's quite a lot of questions around, I guess, independence and access. And so these questions relate to are related to organisational perspectives, I think. So like organisations might need to be really thoughtful about changes that they might need to make in the physical space or to staffing or to various different things, and that sometimes feels like a barrier for the organisation. So how can they get the funding or to make spaces, right? But then how do they not translate that to it becoming exclusionary for young people, I guess? So have you got any tips or advice on how to navigate some of those tensions for an organisation? I guess possibly that might be Michaela or Giles thinking about, sort of structural stuff. Is there anything that you can contribute there?
It's a tricky one. So obviously it always comes down to funding, and with funding it's that kind of people don't want to pay for workers, So they don't want that core side, but if you ask them to buy something, we find a lot of funders like to buy something so they can then say, we bought this, rather than where we kind of usually kind of say, oh yes, I paid for a worker for a year. Doesn't sound as exciting that, you know, we paid for a inflatable surf simulator or something like that. So so I think it's how you can, it's picking the right funders. And we've found we've had to adapt. You know, the buildings we used are not actually owned by us, they're owned by the council, so we had to work with the council, and sometimes they might pay for something themselves, or sometimes we have to either match fund or pay for it ourselves. So something like, you know, we are finding some of the children and young people coming now, their needs are a little bit higher where they can abscond. And so because of that, we went to the council and said, look, we need some magnetic doors, locks put in. Originally told we would have to pay for it and it was going to cost 2,000. By the time the council contractors got involved, it turned out to be 7,500. And the council then said, we'll pay for it because it's our children. You know, it's not just your children, it's our children. And we need to keep them safe. So I think it's about having open conversations with people and just being honest. You know, sometimes meetings can be quite political, whereas actually sometimes if you just kind of just say it as it is, you know, things can get sorted out.
And I think what you said at the start was really helpful as well, which is about, like, funders often like to pay for things and places and resources, and I guess, you know, if we're talking about actually moving beyond inclusivity, it's about, rather than thinking about, oh no, now we've got a young person who wants to join our service that needs, I don't know, a hoist, for example, to get somewhere, thinking about that ahead of time and actually bedding it into, from the start, what are the changes we might need to make to our physical spaces or our provision that make them more inclusive, and asking for those things from funders before they become a requirement, and then you're stuck in the waiting for an answer, waiting for work to be done, etc. So thinking about potential ahead of time rather than after feels useful. And obviously there will be some funders, or there's a few people that ask these questions, there will be some funders that are more open to those things. You know, there are funding databases where you can look through for funders who are interested in specific, I don't know, young women's work, or young people, or, you know, children of people who've been incarcerated. So using those sources available to you up front. And then, as Giles said, some of it's also about just having really bold conversations with people and navigating those tensions that you might have with different services, about making sure that people live up to their responsibility for all young people to have opportunities. And it's not always easy, but being bold, right, Giles, is often part of that. We did have lots and lots and lots and lots of other questions. My colleagues Karen and Zina have grouped them together and put some responses in terms of if they know of resources or things to go together. And what we'll also do is we will ask colleagues on the call if they've got any additional contributions that they want to make to those questions before we send them out, to you. We've got literally 2 minutes left, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for attending and listening and sending through so many thoughtful questions. I definitely want to give a huge thank you on behalf of MYA, all of the participants and all of the people who will access your work beyond this, to all of the panelists who have been so generous with their time and with their contributions today. And I just want to remind everybody that we'll send out the recording and resources from this session after today. But that also this is the second in a series of 4 webinars, so we'll continue this thinking and this work collaboratively as we move on, and we really hope to see you again. And a biggest or an even bigger thank to our interpreters who have been here sort of providing additional support throughout this session too. So we are really, really grateful to you. I hope everybody has a lovely rest of day, and yeah, we'll be in touch with you somehow post this. Take care, everyone.